Normally, in the past, we haven't even had a session in August because we generally have our um, meeting in Colorado. So normally, in the last number of years, basically we start really unknowns in September. So I thought before plunging right into that, even though you've already got the slides, we'll do those next month unless we finish this talk early. But our residents sort of said they gave us some feedback about um, Durham is a huge field and it's a lot of material and all this kind of stuff. And how can we be better at learning Durham, whatnot. So I said, well, yeah, it kind of came to me. Well, maybe I'll just kind of go through and talk about what I did myself over the last 4+ years when I actually went through law school and then actually passed the California bar examination. And I used a lot of the same kind of skills that I used when I was a resident. And now there's a little different sort of technology available. So I thought maybe I'd just give you this talk today, and maybe it'll be helpful to you when you're kind of trying to master this, especially you first years, you're just kind of starting out and it sort of seems like you're drinking out of a fire hose. So anyway, it's more of just of a lecture. And if we finish on time or early, maybe I can show you an unknown or two, but let's just mainly kind of go through this. So what seems to be the problem? Well, obviously there's a ton of material to learn in derm. And compared to some subspecialties, even though all medical school and subspecialties and everything there's a lot of material in there, we may be kind of unique in a way because there's a lot of subspecialties included in derm that aren't always included in other um, you know things. Like, for example, maybe if you're in PM&R, well, you have to know how to do rehab and certain things like that, but you don't have to know psychiatry and surgery and derm path and all this other stuff. Because our field, it's kind of a microcosm of all of medicine. General derm, so you're going to be tested on that. You're tested on surgery, anatomy, peds. All this stuff is going to be on your board, and you're kind of expected to know all this stuff. So it's a lot of material, and it can be pretty overwhelming when you first start out trying to learn it. And even if you've been in it for a few years, it still sometimes can be overwhelming. And even once you're finished, you have to take research exams, and you have to kind of keep up on all this stuff. So I sort of thought about it. So, well, I just went through this myself. I'm certainly old enough to be everybody's father, probably grandfather of some of you guys here. So I know what you're going through in many ways. Basically, going to law school is pretty much like med school. It's basically got tons of material. And, as opposed to when I was in med school and even as a resident, I was working full time while I was doing this and had other commitments. I'm a husband, a granddad now. I've got a large dermpath business here with a lot of employees. I've got a lot of other things that I do here. So I had a lot of other commitments. So how did I do it? How did I master a ton of material, get through it over 4 years? And this little sort of quote there is kind of true. I mean, these professions, law, medicine, things like that, they're kind of jealous mistresses. They do take a lot of your time, and yeah, you sort of don't have a life sometimes when you're doing this. Plenty of times I really wish I could have gone out with my wife and had a nice dinner and everything, but I was studying for an exam, or whatever. So what did I do when I was doing this? And I really originally, I wasn't planning to go to law school. My wife basically kept saying, oh, you'd be good at this. You've taken a couple of MBAs now, and with this online education, there's just so much more you can do than you used to be able to do in the old days, where you had to go to the library and look everything up out of a book, which took hours and hours of time. Now you can do research just sitting in your bed, basically. So she forced me in many ways to do this. She kept nagging me, and I finally decided I would check into it. And basically going to law school, you can do online too. Interestingly enough, you can't do med school that way, although, and that the main reason is because we have rotations, preceptorships where you have to go in and do physical exams and talk to patients, do things like that. But I wouldn't be surprised if in the future with AI and with the ability to do things online, Zoom and whatnot, it's possible that med school may be um, online at some point. But you can go to law school. I never met one single law professor that I ever had in 4 years. So I saw them online and I recognized their face, but I never actually met them in the flesh. So anyway, you can do law school this way. And I knew that it was going to be a major sacrifice in time and energy and compete with other things that I really like to do. So I had to number one was make a commitment. So once I kind of finally decided to do it, I said, okay, well, I'm all in. And you have to do that. So it was the same thing when you're studying any field, dermatology or whatever, you have to be committed to it. If you're kind of going to it half-baked, you're going to have trouble. And I know I would not have been able to do it because there were so many times I said, why am I doing this? Why the torture? Why do I really need to do it? And so but I made the commitment, sort of like, climbing Mount Everest, once you make it or get running a marathon, I said, well, I'm going to do it. And I trained for it, did it, and decided to, go through and do it. And yeah, if it is going to happen, well, it's up to you. You got to make that commitment. And you're going to have to sacrifice, as I said before, this is basically a jealous mistress. I made lots and lots of sacrifices during this time frame. There were lots and lots of times I would have liked to have been watching a movie, going out to dinner, etc. But no, I had a homework to do. I had a paper I had to write. I had to read, a bunch of pages. We had quizzes, and this all closed book stuff, by the way. There's no open book, easy kind of thing. This was closed book, and there's one of the law students I went through. She failed a class because they thought she was cheating on an exam because she walked away from the computer camera that was aimed at her. So it was serious stuff, and there was no easy look through the book and all this kind of stuff, easy questions. It was very difficult and very challenging. And so I did ask myself many times, why am I going through this and putting myself through all this torture? And so the same thing is kind of true in residency. You can't just coast through and think you're going to pass these interim exams you have to take and pass the board examination and all that. I mean, you really do have to work at it. And if you're going to really learn, you got to spend the time. You got to look at you got to see as many patients as you can. You got to look at a lot of slides. You got to read a lot of material, ask a lot of, go on that Q-Derm bank and ask yourself questions, quiz each other. You've got to do this, and you got to make the sacrifices, or you're not going to make it through. Not make it through, but you're not going to be successful at it. The second step, you really need to get some kind of support system. Okay, well, I was really fortunate myself. Got a great family, wife, kids. They understood what I was going through. They knew there were times that they were going to be doing stuff and I'd be studying or away from them. My office staff that I work with, they understood that I was going to be doing some of these kind of things, and they handled a lot of these tasks with relatively minimal oversight, which is really helpful. I reached out to other mentors. There was a young lady, she was, she wasn't super young, she's probably in her 40s, but anyway, she was served as a really good mentor for me. A person, I was on a sort of Zoom call with her and a few other people. I said, this lady really knows what she's doing. And so I reached out to her, and she kind of helped tutor me through some things, and she was a good support system. I had she introduced me to another guy, still a friend of mine, law student, that we interacted a lot online and on phone and whatnot. And you do need somebody to kind of commiserate with when you're doing this. So you'll need somebody to kind of commiserate with too. I mean, there's going to be tough times in your residency program where you feel overwhelmed. So you do want to have a support system that helps support you. So get that. And your program probably has some of this too. I mean, I know our program, we have resources. If a resident feels overwhelmed or whatever, they can come to us at any time and anonymously complain about things or whatever. So we want to try to create a nurturing environment. But the overall massive amount of material you got is anti-nurturing. So you're looking at something that's kind of stressful just from the very beginning because you got so much to learn. So get something to kind of help you get through all of it. This was important to me also, getting some kind of a routine. And you want to be consistent. You don't really want to fall behind. Each one of our classes had assignments. I made sure I did all the reading assignments on time. I knew that if I basically, I had a lot of other things that were going on in my life. And so I said, well, if I don't just really get diligent about this and really be compulsive about finishing these assignments, I'm going to get so far behind. It's going to be super overwhelming. So I just didn't ever let myself get behind. So I would basically, anytime I had time in the evenings or after work or on the weekends or whatever, I'd read or study. I had a schedule of calls with tutors, especially when I was studying for the bar examination. They actually came up with a calendar like this one right here that actually showed you what you're going to study that day. You're going to do a certain number of MBEs, which are multiple choice questions, and you're going to practice some essays and all these kind of things. So I had a really rigorous schedule for this, and then you basically just kind of go through it, and you're really doing that right up until you actually take the bar examination. And that bar examination is you talk about a stressful, rigorous kind of thing. That was very stressful to go through that and spend about 3 to 4 months studying for that thing, and in the middle of everything else I was doing, um, having tutors and all. It was a lot of work and a lot of stress. So I would say that for you, don't get behind. Stay ahead of everything. Because the next thing you don't want to be. How come everybody else knows the differential diagnosis of these things, and I'm sort of still back on week one? So don't do that. Do something similar in your derm studies too, where you've got something that's kind of a schedule, and don't allow yourself to kind of get behind on things. And if you do get behind, it's really super tough to catch up. I mean, it's just not great. And it sort of compounds itself. You feel like you're not doing as well as everybody else, and then you get under more stress, and then you start getting further behind. And so I just would strongly recommend being compulsive about staying, with the program. Don't allow yourself to fall behind, because that just creates a lot more challenges to stress. And there's a ton of material to learn already. This was something that was very important to me also, was trying to develop an actual approach to learning and retaining the material. And so just like you got a lot of material to learn too. You need some kind of a method, some kind of an approach, if you will. And especially, when I was taking this bar examination, the pass rate on this is only about 35%. So 2 out of 3 people that take this exam fail the exam. And so I was going to an online law school. I never met a teacher. I never sat in a class. I had everything else that I was doing. And then I go into this big room with probably maybe 3,000 people or more on, Tuesday in July, a year and a half ago or whenever. And I'm in there, and all these guys that are your age, they're not my age. There were a few older guys in the room, but I was probably one of the oldest in the room. And they were floating around with USC t-shirts and, Harvard, Yale, people from all over the world, or Chinese people there, people from other countries trying to pass this bar examination. So I'm saying, well, here I am. I just did stuff online, and I'm competing with these people that's all they did for 3 years, is basically go to law school. They didn't work, they didn't have anything else to do. They were sort of like college students. And so it was sort of kind of intimidating in some ways. So you basically, in order to do this, you have to sort of have an approach to make sure that I was able to compete with these guys. So um, and this exam had both multiple choice and essay questions, and those were 2 different kind of skills. The skills of taking the bar examination, and just like taking your board examination, are different than the skills you use in residency program. I was making 90s on all the exams in law school, and I thought, oh, this shouldn't be a problem. And then I started doing bar prep. I got back some of the scores, and I was getting 50s. I said, what do you mean I'm getting 50s on this? I've never made a 50 in my life on anything. And it's just a different way that they grade. And it's really, really hard to get a 90. Almost no one gets a 90 on an essay exam in law school. That's extremely difficult on the bar examination. If you make like 60, that's considered passing. If you get, 70, 75, that's considered like super great. So, but anyway, if you take a look at this learning pyramid, and this is important, and I mentioned this and talked about it with our residents too. It kind of shows you passive versus active teaching methods. And so listening to this talk, if you remember 5% or 10% of what I'm saying today, that's probably a win for both of us. But it's not really as good as doing experiential learning. So things like group discussion, practice, having somebody call on you in a session, teaching somebody else. That's the highest. So I'm probably going to remember a lot more out of this than you are because I'm teaching you. But these are the kind of things you can do to increase your ability to retain material when you're doing this. So get together with other residents, have a group discussion about stuff. You want to practice, answer a lot of questions. I probably answered at least 3,000 to 4,000 questions when I was studying for this bar examination, multiple choice questions. And I probably wrote maybe 500 essays, preparing for this thing. So, you got to practice. You got to do a lot of this. So for you, you want to look at thousands of pictures of patients. You want to see as many patients as you possibly can in your residency program. You want to look at lots of slides. So, you gotta practice, do a lot of this kind of stuff. So, and then reading, we all do the reading, but how much of that do we really retain? 10%. So anyway, remember that little learning pyramid, and remember you want to do stuff that's down on that red part of the pyramid, not on the blue part, because that doesn't stick with you as much. You have to do it, but the other stuff is better. So again, these were some, sort of other things that I use as far as learning to kind of get stuff to sort of stick in my brain. We'll talk a little bit about this in a second. And Dr. Ackerman, my former mentor, used to say that in your residency program, you have to write a dermatology encyclopedia in your mind. And I've used that repeatedly when I sort of teach others and say, well, if you really want to learn this, that's kind of what you have to do. You can't just, I'm just going to go on Google and, if you want to learn a foreign language, you can't just use Google Translate. You have to actually learn the language. So, if you're going to learn dermatology and be a good, high quality dermatologist, you have to do that. You actually do have to write that dermatology encyclopedia in your mind. And so these are just some of the ways that you can do it. We'll kind of talk a little bit about that. So what I did, and again, you don't have to do this. Some guys really like to create, they wrote outlines. I use flashcards. And when I was in, med school and in residency, probably more in med school than residency, but both. When I was studying, we used to write the flashcards by hand because we didn't have the computer. We didn't have PowerPoint back in the 80s, or 70s when I was in med school. You actually had to write stuff out by hand. And so I had literally, probably 100 of those little plastic, index card boxes, 4x6 size or 3x5, whatever they were. And I had, written on them things on the front, on the back, maybe the differential diagnosis or something. And you quiz yourself on those, and you take the ones out that you already. So I did the same thing in law school. Basically, I would write the information on a slide like this, and you can put visual images on there. I use lots of mnemonic devices. That's to me is very important. And the other thing I did was use the Apple voice memo function. And I created a lot of voice files with all this stuff on there. So I would take my flashcards and I would record stuff. And then once you do that, you can listen to it in your car, you can listen to it when you're working out, you can listen to it over and over again, and the stuff just sinks in when you hear it over and over again. And so that was really helpful to me to use those techniques. And you can make a slide and put a picture on there and it sticks in your brain. That's really valuable. I'm a big mnemonic person, basically, the older you get, your memory is no longer like a steel trap. It kind of becomes more like a rusty trap. And it's maybe like firm Velcro when you're your age. And maybe when you're younger, as you get older, it kind of gets like the Velcro, like at a golf glove that you open and close many times, it kind of gradually loses that stickiness. So you really have to overachieve in a way to make stuff stick in your brain the older you get. And so I use a lot of these acronyms, acrostics, pictures associated with concepts, chunking material. So like, for example, if you're learning, you know, neoplastic dermatopathology, you know, study all the adnexal things together, study all the follicular stuff together, study the ecrine, the apocrine, you know, those kind of things. That helps to kind of lump stuff together. We'll talk about this method of loci in a minute, memory palaces, assigning numbers, songs and rhymes. You know, I had some songs that I used, believe it or not. And the stupider and the dumber it is, the more you tend to remember it. So when you're trying to learn stuff, you know, all bets are off. You know, you can use anything that you can to help you. But this thing is interesting. I don't know, you guys may not have heard of this. Some of you probably have. It's called the loci method. And basically where this came from, way back in ancient Greece, there was a Greek poet, his name was Simonides. He went to a banquet and he walked out of the building for a few minutes. And when he walked out, they had an earthquake and the building collapsed and it killed everybody inside. And they didn't know who was dead in there. And so they went in and tried to identify, you know, who was there. And Simonides remembered where he was sitting and where everybody else was sitting. And so by doing that, they were able to identify who the individual was and where they were sitting. So that was something that was very helpful to them. And that was kind of before the days of DNA identification, all that kind of stuff. So basically what you can do, because, you know, he was picturing in his mind where the people were sitting. So people say, well, if you can use that for remembering where people sit, you can also use that to remember other stuff. So you can create what's known as a memory palace and say a place that you know really well, like maybe your house or your apartment or your house where you grew up in. You can remember where the dining room is, and you remember what the things were sitting in the dining room. Maybe you remember your dinner table. Maybe you remember the counter or something like that. And you can put stuff in those locations and then have kind of some sort of little activity going on there, and then you can remember it. So let's say you're walking into your, you know, garage and you picture maybe, you know, some guys stabbing somebody with a knife, and you sort of picture that and tie that into maybe something related to contracts or something. So that's what I did. I create a lot of these memory palaces, and it was really helpful to do that. So that's something you can do too. So maybe you say, well, I don't remember all the annexal tumors. Well, maybe I'll put spironoma in the kitchen sink and remember it looks like a church spire, you know, whatever. But those are the kind of things you can do to kind of remember things, and it's helpful. And once you create some of those things and you create these sort of images or whatever that are outrageous, you almost can't forget them. You know, once you've really created an association like that, it gets to the point where you can't forget it if you want to. Another thing that's helpful is this peg word system, and this is something that has been developed over the years. Where they kind of tie a number to a word or letter, and there's a lot of these out there that you can kind of use. One that I read years ago had these. You know, one was a tie because the number one looks like a T. Two was Noah because it has two, you know, hash marks. Three is mom, et cetera. So those are some things you can do, and then you can kind of picture something on there. So you tag something to the number. So let's say you're going to go to the grocery store. So, well, I want to get 5 things. The first one is maybe I want to get milk, maybe I want to get apples and maybe bread. We just picture you're somebody wearing a tie with maybe 100 cartons of milk flowing off of it or something, or maybe the tie is strangling a carton of milk, you know, something like that. And so you kind of picture those sort of things, and then you can remember them based on that. And the more outrageous, you know, by far, the more you're going to remember it. There's some great books on memory. There's a thing called a memory forum, interestingly enough. This book is actually really good. A sheep falls out of a tree. And there actually is a thing called the Memory Olympics, where these guys learn these memory techniques, and then they go in and they have these competitions for who can remember the most playing cards in the least amount of time, you know, randomly, you know, things like that. They have all these sort of tricks that you can use. But these are things that are helpful in remembering when you got a lot of massive information to kind of learn. Songs, you know, cartoon images, you know, we all know the days of the month here. That's a song. There was a person that drew these interesting little cartoons about in learning in the law. I mean, and I think there's a guy that's done some of this stuff for dermatology too, actually. So look at these, go online, look at them, and these are things that also can just kind of help you to remember. Here's a little book, Visual Mnemonics by this guy, Dr. Alam. So that's something you can buy, you can get it, and these are helpful. It's better if you create your own mnemonics though, but you can use some of these too, and whatever. But the more you use of these kind of things, the more it's going to stick in your brain and you're going to remember it. You want to find a system that works for you, whatever it is, and then you kind of want to follow it. The last thing you want to do is just to fail an exam. You do not want to fail one of these core exams. Certainly want to fail your board exam. I sure didn't want to fail the bar examination. I basically, when I was getting ready to do this bar prep thing, I got 2 different tutors. One guy was like an expert at multiple choice, so he and I met once a week. Then I had another person that was really good at essays, and then there was another person that, well, I enrolled in this commercial bar prep course, and that was helpful to me. So I did all this stuff, and I really focused very hard on it. So I'd go in and read slides for a couple hours, and then I'd have a meeting with one of these tutors, then go back and read slides again, and maybe I have to give you guys a lecture and go back and do something else. So basically, I was focusing on this stuff between doing other things, but it was really helpful having somebody that was an expert at this stuff to kind of force you to do it. It's almost like having a personal trainer. You can use the fact that you don't like to miss appointments to your benefit to stay in physical condition. So you can, if I'm going to have a personal trainer, I'm meeting at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, well, you're going to be there, or they're going to call you and say, hey, where are you? Or, you have to pay me anyway because you didn't show up. Well, the same thing was true here. And I'm not sure there are a lot of derm tutors out there, but there certainly, you can work with your senior residents to learn things. You got study groups and all, but I would recommend doing something like that to kind of help you get a system. But you want to make sure that you do something and you stick with us. You don't just take it for granted. And you got to practice really, really diligently. I mean, I basically spent lots and lots of time, as I said before, answering these multiple choice questions, essays, a lot of sitting to my tutors for feedback. If they give me a lousy grade and I didn't like it, well, then I'd redo it. And I kind of did the same thing back when I was studying the dermatology boards years ago. I mean, we had lots of questions that we would go over and answer, old board exams. I don't know if you can get old board exams anymore, but we had those in the old days. There's courses that teach you this. I would recommend that. And whenever we had like a live session in law school, I didn't sit back like a cricket. I was constantly typing in answers to things, and it could have been wrong. I didn't care, but I was interacting with the professor, and to me, that's better than just listening. That you look at that learning pyramid. If you're interacting with the professor, you're learning more than if you're just sitting there listening to what they're saying. And so, to me, most of those guys probably thought I was the world's biggest nerd, but I enjoyed interacting with professor and whatnot. So that was helpful. And I looked at these flashcards, oh gosh, I don't have hundreds of times probably, and listened to those audio tapes hundreds of times. I just kind of immersed myself in a sea of legal information from around March until I graduated, until July when the exam was given. I did not take this for granted. And again, 35% pass rate. I didn't want to do this more than once. I wanted to do this one time. I didn't want to have to go through and study like this again. And I like this quote here: sweat in practice, bleed less in war. Another sort of paraphrase of this is like bleed in practice, sweat in war. So basically that's true. And the Spartans used to say this. They said, let's work hard when we're getting ready for battle. So we get in battle, we don't lose as many men. We don't get harmed as much. So the same thing is true here. When you're studying for your board examination or whatever, you want to really bleed in practice and sweat when you're taking the exam as opposed to the other way around. So again, when I was learning derm back in the old days, I just looked at lots and lots of clinical pictures, books, articles, teaching collections. Well, now we got all this stuff online, Visual DX. I mean, you can go into our website. All our stuff is free. You can look at all that stuff. Every one of these lectures I've given you guys for the last number of years, those are all online. It's free of charge. You have to pay 1 cent for it. So you're welcome to do that as many times you want to. I've had a lot of guys actually that are not residents of ours or that they've never actually been in a formal talk say that they went on and did that. And they said, this really helped me pass the board exam. So you guys have access to me and you have direct access to that. So you're more than welcome to do that. So when I was studying for my board examination, I looked at thousands of glass slides. I had flashcards, notebooks, outlines, studied with other residents. Again, I just wanted to go through all this because I didn't want to risk failing the board examination. And, the derm board, if you make it through your derm residency program and you do pretty diligent, you're going to pass. It's not nearly as rigorous. The exam's hard, but the pass rate's way higher. And I asked one of the law professors one time, I said, well, why does a law school have such a low pass rate compared to like med school, in residency program? We pass most of our residents, 90% or so. We don't do that. So, well, it's kind of because just the getting into law school is not super hard, and a lot of people can get into it. It's kind of looked more as a weeding out process. And if you pass the exam, especially in California, which is the hardest one in the United States, they view that you know the law pretty well if you're able to pass our very difficult exam. So anybody can take law school, but if you don't pass our exam, well, you're never going to get in as a lawyer. So it's kind of a different view. We sort of figure that it's hard to get into med school. It's super hard to get into derm residency. If you can make it through a good derm residency, well, you probably deserve to pass our exam. So that's kind of a different philosophy, if you will. So again, we have the derm question bank that you guys can sign up for. Our residents all have access to that. Again, you can go to our dermpath.com library, go to our Dermpath on Demand site. You can look at any of these things. There's digital textbooks, there's lots of on-site resources, but just like that upper photograph there, you can have the world's best weight set, the world's best rowing machine, the world's best everything. If you don't use it, you're not going to build up any muscles, And I tease my wife because she's got a rowing machine sitting up in our room where we kind of a little workout room in our house. I think she's used it once. I keep threatening that I'm going to remove it one day when she's out of town because it's gathered a lot of cobwebs and dust. And, if you can't just buy a workout program or weight set and expect to get fit from it. You have to actually use it. So you have to use these things, but they are available to you. And, it's so simple now with online. You can do this all the time. We used to have to go to the library, that Jesse Jones library over there in the Texas Medical Center. That was called the Learning Resource Center. We spent lots of time in that place. Everything was microfiche and books and all that stuff. It was really a pain compared to what you can do now. You can do stuff anywhere in the world. And don't give up. I felt like giving up a lot of times. I'll be honest with you. I did this while I had all these other responsibilities. I didn't get to take off the full summer to study like a lot of regular law school graduates did. So they would graduate, their law school in June or July, and then they would just, spend, several months studying and maybe take the exam in November. Well, I couldn't do that. I had to basically continue my job and everything in the meantime. So I studied very, very hard, just like everybody else. I did get discouraged. A lot of times, there was a number of times I said, this is ridiculous. I don't need to do this anymore, but I just stuck with it. And, a lot of guys take law school and they get their JD and they don't take the bar examination. They say, well, I'm never going to really practice law. So I've got my JD and I can stick that after my name and, give lectures and stuff like that. But I wasn't going to do that. I sort of said, no, I'm going to spend the time and energy and pass it. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to go all the way. And so I spent the full amount of time studying and passing the bar, which was tough. That next quote, my dad used to say this. He didn't invent this, but he used to tell this to us all the time, that success is 5% inspiration and 95% perspiration. And there's really a whole lot of truth to that in whatever you do, whether it's learning a residency program, whether it's speaking a new foreign language, whether it's playing a musical instrument, whatever. These are all things that you have to work at it pretty hard. And I was in my 60s, doing this. So if I can do it, you can too. The bad news about this is, and I tell our residents that if they complain about this, I sort of say, sadly enough, I'm not going to listen to too many complaints because I just got through doing it. And, I know what you're going through. So we can, if I can do it, you can too. I'm not going to sort of say it's too hard for you because I know that you can do it. I'm not a genius compared to other people. I've got, Osler said that his mind was made of the most mediocre stuff. That's from William Osler, Sir William Osler, the guy that we all think of as a genius that founded Johns Hopkins, basically. He said when he was giving lectures to his students and, commencement address, he said that his mind was made of mediocre stuff. So it basically shows if you just work at this stuff, you can do it. So just make it happen. No complaints. So anyway, hopefully that's helpful to you. Hopefully you'll remember more than 10% of what I said, but if you take that approach, you can basically, I think you'll make it through your residency program with any problem. And again, as opposed to a 35% pass rate, our pass rate's in the 90% range. So if you just go through, study these things, go through these unknowns, participate in these processes, you're going to be fine.